All right. Well, thank you so much, Ashaka. I really appreciate you. I know we talked about this a long time ago, so it's lovely to finally be here with you. Now, I can't see you while I'm talking because I've got two screens up with my slides, but I do have the chat open. So if people think of things, please feel free to put them in the chat as we go along. This will be interactive. I've got all sorts of little fun things planned as we go along. But my hope is to really get you thinking about music generally, but also how it can be used in healthcare, and get you thinking about maybe how you might think about how to use music in your own lives and also perhaps in your own jobs as well. So I've turned this into a little bit of a story, and this is a topic that I'm very passionate about. I've given different kinds of talks about music, and I love getting people excited about how they can incorporate it into their lives. So we're going to think about what music is to begin with, and then what happens when we listen to music or play music or get engaged with it. Then we're going to talk about music in the context of health and healing, and also some different neurological disorders. There's some fascinating research that's come out of that. Then I'm going to tie that into a little bit about medical education and then do a little summary at the end. So there's going to be various little things that I'm going to get you to do throughout the presentation, hopefully keep you awake. It's not so late for you as it is for me, but still, that's all right. So one of the things that's always intrigued me is that music is really ubiquitous in all societies. And these flutes that you can see in the top of this slide are actually crane bone flutes. And the exact age of them is uncertain, but they've certainly been around for probably about 8,000 or 9,000 years. And the fascinating thing about that is the tonal scale that's on these bone flutes is actually the same as what we use today. So music's been around for a long time, and there's even research that people believe that the brain is just wired for music, and I hope that you'll come to believe that as we go through tonight. But when you think of some of the oldest societies that are in our world, so for example, the Aboriginal peoples of Australia, shown here in the bottom playing the didgeridoo, that's very much a key part of their lives. And also there are things like their corroborees, their spiritual interactions. And so music plays a huge role in that. I had the good fortune to travel in Australia, and I got the chance to go and visit some of these sacred sites, and it's pretty phenomenal, just the acoustics in the places. And I can only imagine what it was like to actually hear a didgeridoo there. The other one I've got there is a Tibetan singing bowl. And of course that gets used for things like for meditation and also for spirituality related activities as well. So in our own society though, music is literally everywhere. So you have music scores on the TV, in film, we can listen to it on the radio. I'll put a nice old fashioned radio there for you. We've got our own personal iPhones, iPods, whatever you might like to listen to. But we also actually go to live music as an integral part of our lives. And it's been challenging in this last couple of years because, of course, that's not been as possible. So what is it about music that gets us so engaged and makes us want to have it in our lives? Well, if you think about music itself, it's actually just sound waves and vibrations. And for each instrument or even our voice, there's a tone or frequency, and then also the intervals. And there's also a fundamental tone and what are called overtones. So when you listen to different instruments, you get a different sound because of these different overtones. So for example, an accordion sounds quite different from, like, say, a violin or an oboe or things like that. You can kind of mimic the sound with an accordion, but it's not exactly the same. And so when you think about listening to music or experiencing it, you know, we do listen to it, but the other piece of it is that people often use their whole body to experience music. You even witnessed it just at the start there when Rosemary chose to turn off her camera and dance around her room. It's very powerful how it makes us want to move and respond, to tap our feet, to actually lift our arms up if we're really excited about what's being played. You'll see that at rock concerts, at gospel concerts, in church. People have this real need to feel the music in their whole body. So it's not just about what we hear, but it's what we experience everywhere. And I thought I'd share a couple of little stories from my own career. So when I was going through residency, I used to play my accordion around the Children's Hospital in Halifax. I was at the IWK doing my pediatric residency and fellowship. And I used to go to the neonatal unit and play. And this isn't that child, this was just from the internet, but there was a little boy who he had what's called gastroschisis. So his bowel and everything was all outside of his skin, and he had to undergo big surgeries to actually fix that. And he was a very irritable baby. And ironically, he loved the accordion and he would settle to sleep listening to it. So it was quite lovely because I got to know this family quite well. And when he went home, the mum and dad said, well, can we maybe phone you if he's having a hard time to sleep and you could play him a tune? So that was one of my most favorite memories of playing music around the Children's Hospital. The other thing I do fairly regularly, again, it's been a bit strange in COVID, is to play at nursing homes. And I'm coming back to this later on in the presentation, but music really brings people alive. And part of the reason for that is the areas that are involved in music processing and memory related to music is actually really retained even in the face of dementia. And so people can just come awake and respond. I've seen people appear moribund, and there was one lady in particular who was brought out in her wheelchair, just really not responding at all, was sitting with her head down. And within about 5-10 minutes of me starting to play, she started to tap her feet. Then she started to move her hands. Then she lifted her head and she started to sing. And at the end of it, she thanked me. And this was a lady that hadn't spoken for 3 months since she'd been there. So it was quite remarkable to just see her come alive. And I've seen that over and over. And there's countless stories of that, like that, in the internet. So music can actually make us feel anything. So it can be sadness, peacefulness, sometimes even torment, depending on the style of the music. We can feel happy, we can feel frightened, and that gets used to full advantage by people who write scores for films. And we'll come back to that again and see what you think about that. You might find some music pleasant or unpleasant, but you certainly have some kind of response. And so what I'm going to get you to do is to listen to just a few short clips of music. And what I'd like you to do is to actually share in the chat what immediately pops into your head. So it could be an image, it could be a feeling, it could be a memory. And so just write in what you're experiencing when I play these different tunes. So here's the first one. Brave, you can even unmute and say, oh, so Sonia's saying dance, socializing, dancing. So what do you think it is about that piece that makes you feel that? And if you feel comfortable, there's a small enough group, you can unmute and maybe talk about that or type it in if you're more comfortable. So interesting, Farhan's saying square dance. So you may not realize this, but that tune that was just played is in a major, the jolliness, and it's also in a major key. And in Western society, a lot of our music that's happy, and certainly a lot of Scottish music actually, is in major keys. And it's when we play in minor keys that we think of it as more melancholic, or you throw in those minor sevenths. And there's something about that that just is sad and makes us feel that way, but we associate that with the kind of music. So here's a different one, totally different style. What about this one? So how did that one make you feel? Or what was the vision that popped in your head? Interesting, contemplation. Oh, that's a great one, storybook. And the old-fashioned dancing, and sometimes when I've used that particular clip before, people said they could imagine people in, like crinoline dresses dancing around together. There you go, Valerie said. Valerie, that's great. Yeah, it's funny how the different style. So here's something completely different then. How about this one? Yeah, now isn't that interesting? So the idea of it being scary is an interesting one because there's some minors in there and the way they've strung the chords and notes together. And it's also on an organ, which of course gives a different feel. So some people think it related to church, for example, but if you play it a certain way, we associate, that's a good example, Heather, is the idea of the old movies and creepy things. So great, thanks for engaging with that. So let's think about your brain now. I'll have to show you this. So I'm always trying to get people excited about the brain as well. And so what I've done here is I've got, if you can see my mouse there. So the red part is the frontal lobe part of the brain. The blue is the parietal lobe. The green is the occipital lobe, and the mustard colored one is the temporal lobe. And then at the back here, the brain is the cerebellum, and that purplish pink color is the brain stem. And so if I were to take a couple of cuts through the brain this way and also vertically, then you would see slices that look like this. And so when you look at this, you can see there's this dark area all the way around the outside, which some of you are going to be familiar with, and that's the cortex or the gray matter. And that's where most of our brain cells are. So we literally have billions of brain cells. And underneath, that white isn't just the white of the page, it's actually all the connections between all these different parts of the cortex. And these fibers are covered with something called myelin, which appears white when you look at the brain. And so it gets called white matter. So you've got the gray matter and the white matter. And then down in the deeper portions of the brain, there's more of the white matter, but there's also these deeper gray structures, which are called the thalamus down here, and then the basal ganglia, these other parts here. And so they're involved in almost like a motor relay system. And so when you look at the other slice, you can see that all these parts are here as well, but they're just in a different orientation. Now, if we were to zoom into one little part of the cortex and we could look at some of the cells there, the cells actually talk to one another through little spaces called synapses. So one cell will release a chemical called a neurotransmitter, and it binds to the other neuron and tells it what to do. And in a very simple way, you can think of that as telling it to fire or not to fire. So we call that excitation or inhibition. And what's amazing is when a child is born, they actually sprout out as many connections with other neurons as you possibly can. So when you look at a newborn and then you look at a little piece of brain at 1 month, 6 months, and 2 years, it becomes this crazy collage of connections. And then what the brain wants to do then is to organize that according to what we need. So when we're learning our language, when we're learning to recognize all the things around us, the people that we interact with, so the brain does what we call pruning. And so that helps it become organized for your particular environment where you live. And how the brain prunes neurons is dependent on whether the pathways are being used. So for example, for young children, if they're neglected, abused, have congenital cataracts, for example, perhaps exposed to toxins or stress, then some of these pathways that they might actually need will also get pruned. But there is some truth to the adage that if you don't use it, you lose it. So it's true for all of us. If you don't use pathways, the brain does continue to prune, but just not to the same degree. But as we're learning, and the reason I want to bring this up is music's a powerful way to learn things. We form more connections within the brain. And so what we do when we learn, all of you that are in medical school, you're learning all these volumes of information, you're putting everything together. So what about music and processing sounds? Well, I always think the brain's phenomenal. And I know I'm a little bit biased, but when you listen, you've got your ear on the outside, which is called the pinna. And then the sounds come in and they go to the tympanic membrane or the eardrum. Then the 3 little bones that transduce those frequencies to your cochlea. And that cochlea is actually lined with special hair cells that are tuned to different frequencies. So they pick up that information and then it goes on to travel into the brain and lands up in that mustardy colored area. And the top part's called the auditory cortex. So what's amazing about that is when it gets there, it's also organized according to frequency. And then the other parts of the brain are involved in understanding what you actually heard. So what about music? Well, there's been, in the time that I've been in practice actually, and probably a little bit longer actually, there's been some amazing research that's been done to understand the impact of music on the brain. And we have a number of different tools at our disposal. And one of them, of course, is an EEG, which actually looks at your brain waves. And you can do different things with this technique because you can measure what are called evoked potentials, so specific responses from different parts of the brain for different reasons. And then also look at how the brain kind of ties into the rhythm that you're playing. And so that's one way to do it, but it's not super detailed. But one of the things people was interested in was to actually understand what parts of the brain are being activated. So if you think of the brain, the primary fuel for the brain is sugar, which is called glucose. And you can actually label glucose with a tiny bit of radioactivity and then look at which area of the brains light up when you do certain activities. So this is an example of that. On the left, you can see what's called a PET scan, which is this special kind of scan using that. And then on the right, you can see all these red areas are all the different parts of the brain that lit up when somebody was playing music. And when you think about it, even as you watch me play my accordion at the start, I'm doing multiple things at the same time. So I was playing with my right hand. So that involves the left side of my brain. I was playing with my left hand, which involved the right side of my brain. I'm keeping in time. So I'm ensuring that I've got the tempo down pat. And then I'm also reading music sometimes. I wasn't for the tunes I played for you, but then you're using your visual cortex. So many different parts of the brain are lit up. Now, another area that's really taken off in the last 20 years is functional MRI. And this is really a cool technique because what it does is it relies on our oxygen levels in our blood. And so when oxygen gets used in the brain, it gets converted to a different type of hemoglobin. So it's called deoxyhemoglobin. So one is oxy and one's deoxy once it's been removed. And that changes the signal in the MRI. And so you can actually start to see signals of where the brain is doing things. And so you basically light it up. So these images that you can see here show all the areas of the brain that light up when the person is playing music. And there's two different ways to capture that. One is to get somebody to actually do a task. And so they're given something specific to do, and then you look at the brain regions that get activated. The challenge with that is getting people to attend to the task and do what you're asking them. But for music, even if you think about the thing that you're playing, so it might be your violin like this lady here, or I could imagine playing my accordion, and even thinking about that will activate the different parts of the brain. The other alternative, of course, is to get someone to play while they're in the scanner, like I've shown here on the right. But there's actually now some even more interesting research that's really gotten off the ground more recently in the last 5 years. And that's looking at something called resting state fMRI, so functional MRI. And even while we're lying doing nothing, or even sitting quietly, then our brain is not completely silent. It's actually still doing things. So we might be reflecting on something or thinking about something, but it's certainly doing things. And they've been able to identify all these different pathways, networks of brain cells that are in existence, even while we're doing nothing specific. And there's some work that's been done now in neurodevelopmental disorders and the impact of music affecting those different networks. And if anyone's interested, we can talk about that a bit later. So just to move us along though, if you take even the different components of music, you can show that the melody, which is of course the tune itself, the tempo, like how fast it is. So it might be a jig or it might be a waltz. But you'll notice that all the different parts, now I'm not showing this in 3D, so there's even more area involved. And the meter is the style of the music. So it might be a waltz, for example, that's 3/4. A march is 4/4. A jig is 6/8, for example. So it just shows you all the different parts of the brain. And as I mentioned earlier, depending on what we play, even if it's just a chord, you can actually activate different parts of the brain. So major chords will activate different parts from minor, because remember, minor chords are associated in our society with more melancholic music. And that sometimes gets more of a response from us. And that's true actually when it comes to things like fear as well, because they're very powerful emotions. And this just gives you an idea of how you can activate different parts. So the reddest areas are the most activated areas of the brain. So if you really love something, see how active it is in the brain. Dislike is much less. So we're not really into that. But the other thing about music is that it affects our heart rate, our blood pressure. It can affect our hormones, specifically the cortisol, which is our major stress hormone. And it's also anti-nociceptive. What that means is it helps pain. And as you saw when Rosemary turned off her camera because she just felt this desire to move, it actually can make us want to move. And I'll come back to that in a moment because I'm going to get you to do a little fun thing with me. But the other thing it does is it activates the reward systems of the brain. These are these little yellow areas shown here. And that's the same area that gets activated by chocolate, for example, and other things as well. So it's quite powerful. And when you think of music and you think of what it's like and how it makes you feel, it's also a very powerful way to evoke a response in us. So I'm going to play you this little part of a movie, which I know you'll recognize, and just listen to the music and how it changes and evokes the feelings and creates the scene.
This species of Variformin's been extinct since the Cretaceous period. I mean, this thing is a this thing. What?
I won't play the whole clip, but I don't know if you could appreciate this, but at the beginning, there's this sense of anticipation and perhaps uncertainty as well. And then it resolves into this lovely major sounding and a little more joyful music. If you've never listened to the soundtrack of Jurassic Park, I really encourage you to do it because I think you'll be quite surprised. It's very beautiful music, and you can really pick up on all the different moods. Now, somebody mentioned silent movies earlier, and Charlie Chaplin, of course, was the really amazing person when it came to silent movies. So I'm going to play you one. I won't play you the whole thing again because it's a bit long, but I'll play you a little clip just to show you the power of the music in this. And I had the pleasure of working with someone who used to play, I would say to him, play this or play that, and he could just do it and he could make you feel whatever it was. And I wish he was here with me tonight because it would be fun. The mood and the anticipation, the differences and yeah, that's right, that's funny. It's really incredible because you really pick up on what's expected, the quieting and the movement as he walks across the cage. And so you really get a sense of that. Now, what I also think is amazing is whether we've recognized it or not, we also pick up on the music and associate particular scenes with certain movies as well. And so what I'm going to do now, and if I was in the room with you, I would actually give you a prize if you could guess all these movies. So we're going to have a little fun. And so what I want you to do, as soon as you know which movie this is from, put it in the chat. Okay, here we go. So you're obviously a fan, Valerie. So that is Indiana Jones. And so it's fun. All right, what about this one? particular one. And there's a particular image that comes in my mind when I hear that one. So Farhan's got it. So that's actually Mission Impossible. And it's that bit at the beginning where there's the old style bomb with you light the fuse and it goes along there and you hear that tune. So there you go. All right. What about this one? Any ideas? Yeah, you're absolutely right, Valeria. That's another piece from Jurassic Park. The first one, it's the first movie. And it's really amazing because I can just see that. And that first part is a little creepy and you don't know what to expect, and then it resolves. So what about this one? And I want you with this one to tell me what the image is that you see. Oops, sorry, hang on. Hit the wrong one. You guys are good. So absolutely, this is Star Wars, but it's specifically when Darth Vader's troops are marching, and I can just see that image when I hear that one. So last movie, see who gets this one. Well, I'm a total fan. I'm giving away my age with all these. Yes, I think we must like the same movies, Valeria. So yes, that's Harry Potter. So you can see that even those little clips just immediately bring to mind movies, because music is an incredibly powerful memory cue for us. And it's quite amazing to me that even from that tiny, like seconds long clip, that you know what it is. And one of the other things that our brains do is we actually can entrain to music. And so I want to do a little experiment with you. So I'm going to play you a tune. And what I'd like you to do, since I can't see you, you don't need to worry about that, but I'm going to play something. And the first time I play a tune, what I want you to try to do is to clap out of time with me rather, and just see what that feels like. So I can't see you, but I can guess what you're going to do when I do this. But I want you to try to clap out of time and just see how hard it is and how challenging it is for you. So here we go. So tell me, how was that easy, or did you find it a little tricky? You can type in the chat if you like.
Were we supposed to be in time or out of time with you?
Out of time the first time.
Oh. Well, I didn't.
So Sonia, saying it was hard. So absolutely. So what happens is we have these cells in our brain that want to entrain to the beat. And so when you try not to do it, it becomes very difficult. And when I do this kind of thing with people in person, they look like they're in pain because they're working so hard to try and do it. So this time, so now I'm not sure who spoke, but you can do it with me this time just to feel the difference. So this is another one. This is the Irish washerwoman. So how was that this time? It's much easier, I think, right? Now, what's amazing is, as humans, you know, we have these cells, but we're not the only species that can actually entrain to a beat or want to dance to a beat. So I'm going to share with you a little friend that I met at a conference. This is Snowball, and see what you think about his dancing.
Gangnam Style.
I'll let him do his last move. So I see that somebody noted, Heather said he's offbeat. And actually, what's interesting is humans are probably the only species that can anticipate a beat. So we can get right on the money. And even though there's other species like birds, like him, he's a cockatiel, and they've shown that other birds like parrots and even you can teach primates to do it, but they don't anticipate the beat. So we are kind of unique in that regard. But as you can see, this was really fun because when this bird was discovered, they initially thought that the owner had just taught him a dance. But when they brought him into the lab, they actually played different tunes. And if he couldn't keep up with the beat, he would even do alternate beats. And he had about 29 different dance moves. So it was quite a lot of fun to learn about him when I was at this conference. So let's now think about music in the context of health and healing. And remember, it can make us feel all different things. It can affect our mood. It can affect our emotions. It can actually affect our hormones, remember, as well. So when we think about health, people have different ways to actually think about that. So you might think of it being sound in body, mind, or spirit. It can mean that you're free from any kind of physical disease or pain, or just that you're thriving or doing well. And as a lot of you probably know, you can be well even if you might be living with a chronic illness, for example, because that can be how you feel in your mind and how you think how things are going for you. And so what does it mean to heal? And so again, some people might think of it as becoming sound or healthy, so being free of disease. And then another one might be to alleviate a person's anguish. So if you're feeling stressed, you could be healed from that as well. But you can also think of healing as a way of putting a relationship right. So perhaps you've had something between you and you want to heal that. And then, of course, in the Bible, we used to think of healing as being free from evil, so to cleanse or purify. So there's all these different meanings. But regardless, music can often play a part in that. And there was a really interesting study that came out just, I think it was 3 years ago now. And it was looking at about 1,800 choristers in Britain and looked at how people responded to being in a choir. And the things that came out of that really don't surprise me because I've been involved in music for a very long time. But that idea of being connected to one another, the physical and physiologic benefit, and those images I showed you of the brain lighting up, if you actually sing in a choir or play an instrument with someone else, your brain actually responds even more. So there's something about doing all this with other people in addition to doing it by yourself. People feel stimulated. And of course, when you play music or you're listening to music or you're engaging in it more, then you actually have to work. And that's actually quite stimulating from a cognitive perspective. People felt better, they enjoyed it, and they even used words like transcendence, like just that being able to actually maybe reach another plane. If you sing in a choir, it actually promotes synchrony and cooperation between the people that do that together. And so it can reduce our cortisol levels, so our stress hormone is reduced, and it promotes bonding between the people. And I always say that if you've sung in harmony with people beside you, it's pretty hard to get mad at them. There's something about that. It can enhance morale amongst a group, and in older adults, it can actually reduce depression. So what is it that's happening then, and how does it make us feel healed or whole? So when you think about music, it can actually create a space that's quite different, because even if you don't know the language, you can actually engage in it. And because of these emotions that I've already tried to share with you from the different styles of music, you don't actually need to know the words to understand the feelings that are being conveyed. And as I've hopefully shown you, when you listen to music, it can help us recall memories, moments, movies, whatever it might be. And it's also used in different ways to bring meaning. So in special events, be that a birth, weddings, funerals, memorial services, any kind of special event, even a big football match or a rugby match, there always is music, and people will sing at that because it makes them feel like they're together and they're one with one another. And it creates that social connection. And of course, music's an integral part of most religions. And so it means there's that spiritual aspect as well. Now, what I find very powerful, and it was really evident over this last couple of years, is music is often used as a way to acknowledge pain for people, to pay tribute to people, write songs to honor people. But one of the things that happened over this last couple of years during COVID was when there was the shooting in Nova Scotia. And what was amazing to me is the musical tributes that poured in to try and provide some healing and hope to the people that were left behind as a result of the people that were killed. It was very moving actually to see that happen, and reminds me of the role music can play in people's lives. The other thing that music has done during COVID is allowed us to maintain some of those connections. So this is a group of women I know that are in a barbershop chorus, and they allowed me to use this photograph because although they couldn't get together in person, they would have these Zoom get-togethers to practice singing. Even though they couldn't sing in harmony together, they would still have that chance to socialize and make connections with one another. And I don't know if you remember this, but in Italy, when the pandemic first got underway, the people would sing, play instruments. There even was an accordion being played on the balcony, and they would sing and play to one another from one side of the street to the other because they couldn't actually get together. So that really reminded me of the power of music in all these different situations. And just as a reminder of what I said earlier, when I play, and the way to evoke memories for people is to play. And so for anyone that you play music that's often from your teens or 20s, which is when our reward systems are incredibly active at that point, you actually can bring that person to life and help them remember those. And what amazes me is they can remember the words, even though they might not be able to remember what they did a few minutes ago. So let me now move on into how music can be helpful in terms of neurology, because that's one of the areas that I'm quite interested in, especially from a childhood point of view as a pediatric neurologist. And so some of the interesting research that's come out is how music can help with social interaction. And there was one study done a few years ago now where they actually took a child and there was another person in front of them. So one person held them and the other person was in front of them. And if they bounced together in synchrony, that child was much more likely, like more than double likelihood of interacting with that person from a social perspective. They had all these tasks that they would engage the kids in. And I saw the videos of this study and it was quite amazing to see them do that. The other area, which is really fun in some ways, but also powerful, is the Suzuki Early Music Program, which is a very engaged, interactive music program for young kids. And these children that are exposed to that adapt better to stress, they smile and laugh more, and they're also much more easily soothed. But if you take all the research around the use of music in children, it actually does way more than that. So if you teach a child a musical instrument and they engage in that process, you can show evidence of increase in IQ. The kids' school grades will go up a bit. Their language memory and processing improves. They feel better about themselves. There's also some work that shows that the kids have better self-control. There's some other studies that show that they're more empathic, probably because they have to engage with one another. They have to listen. They have to cooperate with one another. And also, as mentioned already, it enhances social interaction. So there's a lot of work now being done about the role of music education, and I'm interested myself in the impact of Sistema, which is a program that you may be familiar with, but it's an after-school social music program that began in Venezuela. So it's El Sistema. And here in New Brunswick, we actually have 9 sites, and I'm really interested in the impact of that on the kids' lives, and we'll be doing some projects with them over the coming couple of years. So what about some other disorders? Well, in Alzheimer's disease, as I mentioned before, the parts of the brain that are involved with recognition of music and response to music, so the medial prefrontal cortex is one area, that actually is sort of retained even in the later stages of Alzheimer's disease. And so you can really help people connect and come alive, even when you might think that they're no longer there. It can also reduce anxiety and agitation for people because they probably feel better. But one of the other neurologic disorders that I always find really fascinating, and I've seen a number of amazing videos about this as well, is in stroke. So stroke can be 2 different kinds of stroke. So it can be a lack of blood flow to an area of brain. So that's on the right. And if that happened by a blocked artery, then that area beyond that blockage can get injured and some of the tissue will likely die. And that's then the challenge that you have. You can also have a rupture, so a bleed. And so that can bleed into one area of the brain as well. So music's been used in different ways for stroke. So it can improve how someone walks and the speed that they walk at. It can also improve their stride length and also the symmetry. So if you have a problem on one side of your body, if you do repetitive music training, it can actually help with the movements. The other thing it can do, if someone's having trouble with their speech, it can actually enhance their ability to communicate if they start singing, and it helps them redevelop some of the speech in terms of the movement of their mouth and tongue and being able to articulate the words. And then another area is Parkinson's disease. So Parkinson's disease is a disorder that causes the death of special cells called dopaminergic cells. So these are cells that are dependent on dopamine and produce dopamine, one of our neurotransmitters. And if you can't produce that, over time, it affects a particular pathway in the brain, and it makes it hard to initiate movement. And it can also affect your emotion in your face and also your ability to project your voice. So the voice often becomes quieter and like a whisper. And then the person walks with more of a shuffling gait. They don't swing their arms when they walk, and it's difficult for them to turn. So normally if we walk along, we can pivot and walk back without even thinking about it. But for someone with Parkinson's disease, they have to stop and kind of move around. So we call it turning on block because it's very difficult for them to pivot quickly. If you get someone to do activities to music, they can actually move more fluidly and freely. And I've seen numerous videos now of this. You can even find them on YouTube and see them actually move to music before and after, the music starts playing, and it's quite remarkable. Now, the other area that I think music is hugely important is in end-of-life care. And so you can have 2 different types of music, what's called thanatology. So it can be active, which is expressive. And then the other one is receptive, where you're trying to think about ways to respond to the actual physiology of the person, but also you want to create some memories as well. So most commonly, this is with harp and voice, but you can use other instruments as well. And sometimes they will play to try and respond to the person's heart rate, their breathing, or even their temperature. And so it can meet all sorts of needs in the person, but also the people around them as well. And I would argue that what music can do at the end of life, when you think of all the ways it impacts our body, is it can really bring solace and dignity and perhaps even a grace to what's happening to the person, and hopefully bring back some shared memories, perhaps some laughter as well. And for the person that might be dying, it could help with their pain, the restlessness they might feel or agitation, and even the lack of sleep. It might help them have some peace. And then for the people around them who might have felt some anger or fear, sadness, it might even help them deal with that and also grieve and get through that. So these are some of the examples in terms of the disorders that you can use music for. And I'm always interested, I'm going to bring this back now to medical education in general. And I'm always thinking about fun ways to integrate music into my teaching. And one of the ways that I like is to think about little ditties that you can actually bring things to life and think about how they might be used in different ways. So one of the areas that I've taught quite a bit over the years is our metabolism 1 unit. And in that unit, they learn about vitamin D metabolism. And so if I were to show this pathway like this and say to you, yes, so you have the sun shining on the skin, it converts provitamin D3 to pre-vitamin D3, then it gets converted to vitamin D3, goes to the liver, becomes 25 hydroxyvitamin D, and then 125 dihydroxyvitamin D, and that has impact on the intestine and also the bone, and then is involved in calcium metabolism. And you'd be thinking, oh my goodness, I'll never remember any of that. And so I thought, well, how can we learn this and really get it together and help the students remember it? So over the years, I made up a little song that helped the students remember this. So I thought I would sing it for you, and you can sing along if you get the hang of it as you go, because nobody's going to hear you. So it goes like this, and it's to a familiar song. It's supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. So here we go. Sunshine falling on the skin forms cholecalciferol. Then it goes to liver to become calcidiol. Then it's off to kidney to become calcitriol. Cholecalciferol, calcidiol, calcitriol. Diddle 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 I, diddle 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 I. Sunshine falling on the skin forms cholecalciferol. Then it goes to liver to become calcidiol. Then it's off to kidney to become calcitriol. Cholecalciferol, calcidiol, calcitriol. So hopefully you've got it and you'll all remember that now. And what was really fun is when I first introduced it to the students, they all looked at me like I had two heads and they said, you're crazy. But you know what? They didn't forget it, and they joked with me later that they were kind of whispering that to themselves when they're in their exam. So these can be fun ways. There's all sorts of ditties you can find, and I often thought it'd be fun to make ditties for all the challenging pathways that you can put together. So that would be my dream, that I'd have time to do that. And so there you see, that makes it much more sense to watch that happen than that complicated one from the day before. So then the other thing is, how do we make this a part of our lives? Well, there's some other interesting work around rhythms in music research. And so they've shown that depending on the rhythm that you choose, it can help us get us going in the morning. So there might be a particular tempo that you want to pick for you that makes you feel a little more energized. If you're looking to be calmed, I don't know about you, but when I'm in the hospital, one of the things that I find really challenging is they always have CNN on all the TVs, which is totally stressful and gloom and doom. And I've often thought if we had nice music, like pleasant music that would calm people, they would feel less stressed going in for their surgeries. The people that were waiting to see their loved one come out would feel less stressed. The other thing that music can do, and I think you're gathering this from everything we've talked about, is give us energy and help us have fun. And then remember, it can also help us build relationships and collaboration with one another. So one of the things that we hope to do in one of the local hospitals, and we were just about to start it when COVID hit, was to start an interprofessional choir and have that available for people to come at lunchtime and make it very low key, not stressful, just come and have fun together. And I really do believe that would build relationships and help us interact with one another. So I'm hoping as we come close, I hope, to the end of COVID, that will actually happen. Now, I will tell you that you're probably realizing I'm more than a little biased about this, and particularly about the brain as well. But I do believe that music is a whole brain workout, because as I've mentioned to you, I have actually said to you that even when I'm playing my accordion, my whole brain is engaged in that process. And when you play any instrument and you're using both hands and you're doing all these different things, you're reading the music, you're tapping your foot, you're listening to others, you're actually engaging all parts of your brain. And so another thing I thought I would share with you is I like to think about writing music and having fun. And I thought I would share a little bit from New Brunswick. So this is actually the river outside my house. Now, it doesn't look like this right now because it's been frozen. And we were actually walking along this river last week because it was ice. And we went along in our snowshoes. But the other thing that New Brunswick's known for, of course, is the Fundy Bay. And so the Bay of Fundy is the highest tides. And I'm going to sing you a little ditty that I wrote called A Funday on the Fundy. And this is the chorus. So if you get the hang of it, you can sing along with me. Okay, so I'll play the chorus first. So I'm going to play my ukulele because I thought you should hear a couple of different instruments tonight. So here we go. Let's go. Let's have a fun day on the fun day. Let's have a fun day every day. Let's have a fun day on the fun day. Playing on the shore while the tide's away. You have to realize when the tide goes out, you're on the beach and you can walk way out. Let's have a fun day on the fun day. Let's have a fun day every day. Let's have a fun day on the fun day. Playing on the shore while the tide's away. Tree-lined bricks all along the shore, a kaleidoscope of color in the rocks below. Keep your eyes on the water, you might see a whale hiking on the Fundy Trail. Let's have a fun day on the fun day. Let's have a fun day every day. Let's have a fun day on the fun day. Playing on the shore while the tide's away. Playing on the shore while the tide's away. Playing on the shore while the tide's away. So that's my fun little ditty I wrote about the Fundy, and it really is a spectacular area if you ever get the chance to come and visit. Oh, that's good. Now, the other thing, I get teased a lot about the accordion because what made you pick accordion? And because they always said, well, it's not as bad as bagpipes, but here's one of my accordion humor ones that I love. So welcome to heaven, here's your harp. Welcome to hell, here's your accordion. And over the years, it's been kind of fun because it's not the usual instrument that most girls play. And when I was young, I was the only girl in my accordion school of music. So I was always the odd one out. But I guess what I hope I've shown you over this hour we've had together so far is that music has a very powerful impact on our whole body. So remember, it can affect our hormones, which is our stress hormone, cortisol particularly. It can affect your adrenaline or epinephrine, so it can change your heart rate. It can make us feel good. It can make us all feel all different kinds of emotions. It can be involved in our health and healing and wellness. So engaging in music and participating in things like choirs or even singing together and having fun can actually make you feel better, even when you're feeling quite stressed. And I hope I've shown you, and this is not them all, but I chose some of the areas that I'm interested in from a neurologic perspective, that it can really help in some of these disorders to help them improve in terms of their functioning and how they feel about themselves again. It can also enhance connections between us, just generally. And it's fun for teaching. So if you can find ways to integrate it within your teaching, it's a really great thing to do. Oh, so here's Valeria saying that she plays piano. Well, you know what's really fun is people say to me, oh, can I have a go at the accordion? What most people find the hardest is the bellows, because you're moving your left arm in and out, and then they always want to sway their whole body because it's hard to think of just moving your arm in one go. So they always tease me that I can pat my head and rub my belly at the same time. So what I really want to encourage you all to do is to think about, how could I incorporate music into my life and into your days to actually get you going, make you feel like you've got some energy, get excited about something, think about what you might join in terms of an activity that involves music. And then hopefully I've persuaded you that music truly is the best medicine. And so I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm hoping that we can just even have a few minutes if people wanted to share their responses to what we've talked about, ideas of their own where they would like to be involved in music or perhaps have already. I'd love to hear you. And I could also play another tune if you want to before I let you go.
I've got a comment to make.
Sure.
Because I was a patient in the University of Alberta Hospital. They have art on the ward. And so artists would come around and they may give you some paints to draw something on a piece of paper. And I can't even draw a stick person, so that was pretty useless. But they offered me some music. And I said, I would love music. And so this young girl arrived about 4 o'clock one afternoon with her keyboard, and she started to play music. And the people down, the other patients down around the ward, they would clap after a piece of music. I said, can you go out into the hallway so everybody can hear you? And it was just, it brought some... a sense of quietness over the ward. People didn't yell out and complain about their pains. It had taken them to a different world, and I just loved that.
Well, you know, Sonia, that's amazing, because when, you know, the last couple of years have been kind of bizarre, because normally at Christmas, for example, we have music in the hospital, and there's a group actually of mostly respiratory therapists that put on a kind of a Christmas show. And of course, none of that's been able to happen because of COVID. But this past Christmas, I decided to take my accordion and to play on the ward. And then one of the therapists that I work with said, oh, Wendy, you should go all around the hospital. Well, I went into the hallways and people just flocked out of the room. So exactly like you're describing. And they were just clapping and singing with their masks on, I might add. but they were all just said it just lifted their spirits, because everyone was feeling quite blah. And it just is a reminder. And people tell me the accordion is, I think it's because of the different tones in that, but they find it a happy instrument and it makes them feel good. And so, but I hope that I bring a piece of that to it as well. But it definitely seems to lift people's spirits.
It's when my board
takes it to the long-term care facility, and everybody comes out of their rooms to be able to listen to him or sing along. Yeah, and it's so very therapeutic.
Well, that's great. And Sonia, you're from Australia, right?
No, New Zealand.
Oh, New Zealand. Oh, I got it wrong. I should know, because yeah, that's funny. My partner's from Australia, so I've got it wrong. That's all right.
No problem.
Yeah, Rosemary.
When my brother-in-law was a medical student, he decided to fundraise to buy a grand piano for the hospital. And we had T-shirts, music makes the best medicine, and so on. I thought that was great.
Oh, no, that's great. Wonderful. Yeah, Valeria.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Dr. Stewart, for your wonderful presentation. I am merely a first-year medical student, so I feel like I have a lot to learn. We haven't covered neurology yet, so it was very interesting to see the different parts of the brain. And I guess I had a question for you. Out of curiosity, how did you decide to go into pediatric neurology, if you don't mind my asking?
No, not at all. So it's kind of interesting, because when I was, first of all, medicine wasn't my first career. So I was in research, and it was while I was doing the research, I decided to go into medicine. And I've been around kids and looking after kids since I was a teenager. So I really felt strongly I wanted to be with children in some way. And I actually got quite interested in medical school in doing pediatric cardiology. But then I thought there's only so many things that could go wrong with the heart. So I thought, since I was a kid, I'd always been fascinated by the brain. I always thought it was very cool. I used to have this book about the brain even when I was a child. And so I was always drawn to it. And I found it the most interesting in terms of the organ systems. And so it seemed like a natural choice, to be honest. And all my research had been in neuroscience. And so in the end, I came back to it, even though I'd got sidetracked for a little while. For about a year, I seriously thought about cardiology. And so for me, it was, once I chose neurology, for me, it was always going to be pediatric neurology, just because I wanted to be with the kids as well. So that's what happened. But although I took the long route, I did my full 4 years of pediatrics, then a pediatric neurology fellowship. So I made it a bit of a long haul. Now you can do it in 4 years, depending on which program, or 5, if you just go straight into peds neurology. Yeah.
Very cool. Thank you.
No problem.
Wendy, I'm very upset about the fact that music in the schools is often regarded as a sideline or marginal study. When my kids were going to school in the 70s, there was a very strong music program in Halifax. And music for our children, and they're now in their 50s, is such an important part of their life. They play in groups, they play in orchestras, they compose, they play different instruments. It's a very central part of their life. And I think it all really came from that early introduction to the importance of music. Now, music seems to have disappeared from many of the schools as an important part. And I wish that our younger generation would be exposed more to the importance of music. They concentrate on things like math, but music will become something for the rest of their lives.
Oh, listen, I totally agree with you, Jock. What ends up happening, and I've talked to a lot of people here about this, is that when funding is short, the first things that get cut are the arts-based activities, including music. And so that's why I'm so interested in the outcome of the kids that participate in Systema. So these kids get 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. So they get a total of 600 hours of orchestral music training in an ensemble setting, and they get it for free. And so it's a nonprofit organization that fundraises to offer this. And so I think the more data that we can show of how it can affect kids, one of the things I'm interested in too is I refer kids to the program, because children who struggle with social interaction, with attention, all those things, they can actually change. And I've seen it anecdotally, but we're hoping to prove that that is what's happening. But you can actually shift some of that. And I do worry that, I know they have to learn all the other skills, but if you actually learn an instrument, you actually enhance those other skills. You actually can apply the skills you learn. And I think that's where the power lies, as well as having it. You're absolutely right, Jock. I mean, I'm so glad I kept it up. You know what I mean? To have this in my life now has been a gift in the last couple of years. I was telling Ashaka before everyone came on that I've got a green screen behind me. I've got it covered up with red just because it goes with the tartan. But I've been doing like videos and things like that, playing music and creating virtual choirs and bands and having fun with that. And so it certainly kept me going in this time of isolation. Yeah. Does anyone else have any thoughts or things they'd like to ask or share?
Well, our grandkids are both went through Suzuki Music, and they're now in high school and junior high, and I'm really glad for that. Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. It's a great program. Yeah.
I think now there's so much just listening to music and not kids getting together and singing together. Any of us, you know, we went to camp and had groups that we sang together, but I don't know that that happens much now for younger people.
Yeah, I mean, there are camps, of course, but I don't feel like it's offered more widely. You know what I mean? It's often for specific disorders and things. So, yeah. So I'm conscious of time, but would you like me to play another tune before I let you go? Okay.
Yes, please.
Maybe I'll do something a little different. I've got some music here. I'll take you on a little trip to Europe here. I'll play you one of my favorites. right. So you guys can imagine that you're on maybe somewhere in Italy. That would probably work. Okay.
Great. And it does evoke the sense of being in Italy, doesn't it?
I know, it's amazing. Yeah.
That was wonderful.
The other happy instrument you should pick up next, Wendy, is banjo.
Oh yeah, you know, it's funny, that one I haven't tried. I've got the ukulele and I've got a mandolin, guitar, but I haven't tried the banjo yet. So there you go. So
all banjo sounds are happy.
Absolutely, that's right. Now someone else was going to say something. Go ahead.
I was going to say, Dr. Stewart, this is one of my favorite obliquity presentations, and
thank you.
I just want to thank you so much. In a future life, I want to come back as a pediatric neurologist. Your spirit is phenomenal. And yes, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for being here. So I'm going to play you a tune then. So I'm going to play a really well-known Scottish song called Scotland the Brave, but I'm going to follow it with a song called We're no awa to bide awa. So if I translate that, it's we're not away to stay away. So hopefully we'll meet up again. That's what that means. So here we go.
That's great.
All right. So Shaka, I don't know. I'll happily keep playing. So people will tell me you have to find my off switch when you get me playing my accordion.
I think it's a good time now to perhaps bring our session to an end. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. And thank you so much, Dr. Stewart, for this amazing session. I think we all can say that this is one of our or most, at least mine, was one of my favorite sessions. So feel free to stay tuned with our website and our mailing list for our upcoming workshops. And I'm sure you all know our social media by now, but we do regularly update our future workshops, and we will be posting a recording of this workshop as well. So if you ever want to look back and take a look at what Dr. Stewart has shared with us today, it'll always be up there for you.
Well, thank you so much, Ashaka, and thank you all for coming. I appreciate it. And I'll play you out.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
No problem. All right.